Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming. I'm joined by my colleague who does a great job as Senator from across the river. We work together on many things, Senator Bob Menendez. I'm joined by representatives of the Humane Society. Your name is?
Brian Shapiro.
Brian Shapiro, and of PETA?
Ashley Byrne.
Ashley Byrne. Ashley Byrne. And most important, we're joined by Winston, who is actually, you'll see, Winston is playing a role in this press conference, as you'll see in a minute. Okay, so we're here to talk about what's happened with Fly Nyan. We all know the terribly dangerous accident that occurred over a year ago, right here, where the door was open and 5 people fell out of the helicopter and were killed. Landed and drowned. The helicopter crashed, the door was open, and they drowned. And we don't want that happening again. And so Senator Menendez and I have repeatedly asked the FAA to close a loophole that allows this to happen. The basic bottom line is they call it the aerial photography loophole. If you're taking aerial photography, you can keep a door open. But that is for commercial things, not for helicopter companies to lure tourists and others into dangerous situations. Well, what's making matters worse? Fly Nyan has now added a new lure. Bring your dog and hold your dog out the window. That's disgraceful. It's dangerous. The dogs have had no say. When people go on these helicopters, they have some say. The dog doesn't have any say, and it makes things even worse. And they're offering a 50% discount if you want to bring your dog and hold him or her out of the window. This has gone too far. After the tragedy that happened here in the East River in 2018, we do not want this to be repeated again. And we certainly don't need a profit-making company to come up with new schemes that endanger animals, endanger people, and lure people to something that is clearly dangerous. So number one, FAA, close this loophole now. This idea of aerial photography should not be for tourists. It should be for only commercial instances that get licensed. And B, Nyan, stop this cruel and dangerous policy of saying you can hold your dog out the window and you can get a 50% discount and fly. It's just outrageous that they do it. Now, let me see if I'm leaving anything out. Yeah, despite the death of 5 people, for Nyan to continue to do this is the greatest act of corporate irresponsibility. We don't want to come back and there's another accident for something that is hardly essential to the New York economy or to any person who visits New York's enjoyment of this wonderful and great city. To know that the same company where 5 people died is now strapping dogs into the helicopters for whatever is outrageous. Strapping dogs in for dangerous door-off flights is just awful, and we don't want it to happen. First, we have a picture here. Look at the sign, what it says. Save 40%.
Well, we say 50.
They now say it's 50 online on your next flight, and help support Pilots Pause. Pilots Pause is the hashtag that you can use for a discount. Pilots Pause. Is that outrageous? And second, here we have booked poor Winston on a flight at 12 o'clock. To show you that this is really happening, we just called up as a tourist, one of my folks, and booked Winston. Obviously, lucky you, Winston, you are not, you dear boy, you are not going to have to go on a flight. But to show you how real this is, we booked one. And it with the booking fee, you see, the discount was 50% off. See it? When you bring your dog. Can you believe this? What will they stoop to next? Senator Menendez. Oh, here is a picture. My staff is always there with the props. Here is a picture of a dog strapped in. You can see it's not very secure.
His little paws grasping.
And as Angelo points out, his little paws are grasping the owner because he's afraid. This is not Winston. This is some other poor pug. And this is the letter that Senator Menendez and I sent to the FAA administrator, Steve Dixon, to get this whole thing with open doors and tourists to be stopped, to close this loophole, to redefine this, what it was really for, commercial flights, not for this. Senator Menendez.
Well, let me thank Leader Schumer for bringing us together on an important topic. Aviation safety is an issue of paramount importance to our region, and our constituents both in New York and New Jersey live and work among some of the busiest and noisiest airspace in the nation. I've always believed that safety first is more than a slogan. It's a promise that has to be kept, whether it's a cross-country flight or a helicopter ride. The entire business of air travel depends on people's trust in the system. That's why after the Colgan Air Flight 3407 crash in 2009, Senator Schumer and I fought and secured stronger pilot training standards. That's why last year I supported the FAA bill that resulted in rest standards for flight attendants who play a vital role in air traffic safety. And that's why we joined with colleagues to ban aircraft manufacturers like Boeing from selling essential safety components a la carte, as we saw in the 737 MAX crashes. So today, U.S. airspace is among the in the world.
Right.
But that doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. Unfortunately, helicopters continue to present a substantial safety risk. Our region has witnessed our fair share of tragedies, whether it was the loss of nine people when a tourist helicopter and plane collided over the Hudson in 2009, or as Senator Schumer said, the death of 5 passengers in a doors-off helicopter flight in the East River in the spring of 2018, or the recent death of a helicopter pilot who crashed in Manhattan earlier this year. So what we're saying is that we need to continue to make the airspace as safe as possible, and that includes helicopter traffic. So as long as helicopter flights are available to consumers, we need to uphold the promise of safety first. So I think that it's incredibly important that we are able to make sure, as we did last year with the FAA, to have the type of seat restraints that people could, if they're having a crash, could unleash, which they didn't in that fatal crash. That's something the FAA took corrective action. We want them to take action now on this loophole that ultimately allows an amateur, not a professional photographer, not when someone doing it for a television station or a news station, to ultimately hang off the side of a helicopter in an open seat capacity and create a risk to their lives. And then to add the cruelty of having your animal, who certainly, isn't up into taking flights in open doors and being hung off the side so you can take pictures of it, ultimately that is incredibly cruel to the animal. So this is about human safety, and it's about ultimately making sure that animals are not subject to the cruelty that is taking place. And this is not the first time that we've had an issue with Fly Nyan. And this is why we also need federal intervention, because they have flights in Miami, in Las Vegas, and other places as well. That's why we believe federal intervention is necessary.
Thank you, Bob. And as Bob said, he and I have been a team fighting for airline safety. I worked long and hard after the crash in Buffalo to make sure that pilots had adequate sleep and adequate training. It's been a crusade of ours for a long time, and it's been largely successful. There's not been a single commercial flight where a person's been killed, I think, since 2009. But you go around the edges, like with the helicopters and the open doors or other kinds of things, and we still have a ways to go on safety. And with that, let me call on Mr. Shapiro of Humane Society.
Thank you, Senator. Hi, my name's Brian Shapiro. I'm the New York State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. Please ask yourself what possible purpose it serves to dangle a pet at 1,500 feet in the air in an open aircraft simply so someone can take selfies with their pet for the family photo album. It's cruel and inhumane, and we hope that the companies that do this will focus more on improving safety than expanding into such a cruel and inhumane practice. We're very pleased that Senator Schumer and Senator Menendez are here highlighting this issue. The Humane Society of the United States supports them, and we hope that the FAA will close this loophole. Thank you.
And now we have Ashley Byrne of PETA.
Thank you, Senator. This is a wretched and reckless idea from takeoff to landing. Most dogs are already deeply afraid of flying. You can't explain the situation to them. And the noise alone of a helicopter would be enough to cause a lot of dogs to panic. And if a dog gets loose and panics in the small confines of a helicopter, things could go wrong for everyone very quickly. We're hoping that people and companies will realize that animals do not care about Instagram likes. They don't care about having the best photo on social media. And whether you're talking about posing with drugged tiger cubs or dangling a dog out of a helicopter over the Hudson River, it is never okay to prioritize a personal thrill or a social media splash over an animal's well-being and safety. So thank you so much to the senators for calling attention to this, to the cruelty and the danger involved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. We'll now take questions on this subject. Unless, what's his name, Wagner? Winston would like to say anything. Do you want to bark in disbelief, Winston?
The cat's got his tongue.
Oh, Angelo the punster. My favorite was I did something about the loss of honeybees, and Angelo wrote, "It's so nice to be here." Anyway, he said the cat's got his tongue. We don't know. There's no excuse. The FAA could have closed this loophole protecting animals and people months ago, and we don't know what's taking them so long. Bob and I keep pushing them and pushing them. Maybe now that they learn of this new outrage, it'll be even, they'll move more quickly.
And they exclusively can regulate it.
Yes.
Down to the dog, nothing to state or any other.
Correct. Well, they should basically say that these doors-off flights should only be for commercial and news purposes, not for individual tourists who are much less experienced, don't strap in well, and as Ashley said, a dog could panic, and who knows what will happen then. You know, if the dog runs out or does something wrong, what'll the owner do? And God forbid there be a serious accident hurting both. Any other questions on this subject? Okay. Are you a Giant fan?
I am.
Bob and I have one more thing to say. Say it together. Go Giants. Go Giants! We're both Giant fans. Yes. Yes, off topics.
I only have time for a couple.
Okay, Senators, both of you, did you know about the planned Camp David meeting with the Taliban, and what you did, or what are you
I'm going to let Bob answer that. He's the ranking Democrat on foreign relations and does a fabulous job, and then I'll fill in.
Thank you, Leader. No, the answer is no. And we have been pressing the administration for information on the talks for months. We got one private session with Ambassador Khalilzad months ago, and it was just the incipiency of the talks, and we have serious concerns. Number one is you can't have peace unless you have the Taliban and the Afghan government together. This has been a one-sided talk. And secondly, I don't know how you bring the perpetrator, or those who gave refuge to the perpetrator of September 11th as we approach the 18th anniversary to Camp David when they're in the midst of conducting attacks which recently created the death of an American. So I think it was ill-conceived in the first place. It's another example of the Trump administration's foreign policy, which is a high-wire act that ultimately is focused on Trump as a persona, but not on the strategic, methodical effort of creating peace, whether there or any other place in the world.
And I just add something. This is sort of when Trump takes over, things get messed up. So the bottom line is that the leader of Afghanistan, Ghani, who most people think has done a lot better job than his predecessor, has been basically excluded. And he's never met with the Taliban. For the U.S. to meet with the Taliban and not have the leader of Afghanistan to meet with the Taliban is something that's doomed to failure. And yet, where are the big boys at home? Where are the Pompeos saying you got to do this before you can go forward? But we know what happens. Trump wants to do something, no one tells him not to, and inevitably, like in North Korea, like in Europe, it gets messed up.
Senator Schumer, regarding the faction of the FARC in Colombia that seems to be getting back together. It's a problem just because it seems to what do you think the impact is going to be in the United States? What is the role of the United States, especially given their ties to Venezuela and Cuba?
Well,
Foreign affairs expert.
okay. Well, look, Colombia went through a peace process. A major leader of the FARC has violated that peace process by leaving the country. I recently was in Colombia, met with the president of Colombia, who is still committed to that process, but it cannot ever be a one-sided element at the end of the day. And so, we have helped Colombia dramatically through Plan Colombia, through our engagement with Colombia, through trade agreements with Colombia. It has turned around the country dramatically. But it is ultimately up to those who are involved, who, if they really want peace, then they have to abide by the accords. And if they fail to do so, then they need to be prosecuted to send a message that if you're not going to follow peace, then there's a consequence to you at the end of the day.
I'll just talk about our role in Afghanistan, but when other countries outside of Colombia, particularly Venezuela and Cuba, sometimes not running, what is our role?
Well, we have been actually engaged in sanctioning Venezuela, particularly under Maduro, for the consequences of what he's done to the Venezuelan people, and also because he is harboring the FARC. And as it relates to Cuba, they have been part of propping up the Maduro regime and giving refuge to the FARC. So both of these countries are facing consequences as a result of standing up for a terrorist organization that supposedly was committed to a peace process, and in some elements of it are violating it.
Other questions?
Senator Schumer, Governor Cuomo,
Well, wait, let someone else get a question. You got one. Anyone else? Okay, you get the last one.
the slate is clear on all of them, but Governor Cuomo has expressed
Who's making the rules? It's a joke.
has expressed interest in consolidating primaries, congressional and state, with the presidential ones in April. It actually, in his dream of dreams, although he admits it's not too realistic, would like to move all of it into February to get more on the.
Yeah, I haven't really studied the consequences of that, so I couldn't comment. Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Senator, do you